Welcome in, Sooner Nation. My name is Jason Ray, and we are live on July 28th for our Sooner Tailgate show. Thanks for jumping in. My name is Jason Ray, your host. We'll be here with you for the next hour or so, or however long it takes, however long we have, however many questions that you guys have or comments, and whatever the conversation takes us. That's how long that we'll go. Happy Friday, everyone. We're almost to the weekend, basically to the weekend right now, right? 4:00 on a Friday afternoon. So 1 week from today, when we're talking again at this point on next Friday, God willing, we will be in fall camp. So the summer is, believe it or not, I know you can't tell by the way the temperature is outside, but we are almost into fall from a football perspective. So we're getting close. The first preseason NFL game, if you're into that, is next week, I believe on the 1st, my birthday, August 1st, on Tuesday of next week. And so, like I said, we get cranked up with everything football. So thanks for joining in. Like we say a lot of times on this, make sure you have that notification bell hit and know when we're going live, because from time to time we will have to switch it up a little bit and make some changes here and there, from a work perspective or day job, and things happen, vacations and things like that. But as I mentioned, we've got tons and tons to talk about, right? So there's tons of recruiting news going on with some big time names going to be committing within the month of August, some pretty quickly early on in the month of August. We've got a lot of, like I mentioned, fall camp getting ready to get kick-started next week. The media availability, I believe, is on Tuesday, August 1st. And as I mentioned, the fall camp will get kicked off on Thursday, August 3rd. So hopefully we've got a little bit of news and notes to discuss as far as that goes next Friday. Then we got conference realignment stuff going on, with everything going on with Colorado and what's going to happen next for the Big 12. And so I know that's near and dear to a lot of our hearts, understanding we're going to the SEC next year. But certainly there's a lot of that going on in terms of that. And then, like I said, we'll talk through some of my predictions from a depth chart perspective on the offensive side of the ball, and really talk through some of those. So as you guys are going through, and we'll get to that probably a little bit later, but as you're thinking about that, be prepared for some questions, some comments related to kind of the offensive side of the ball as we go through, and we'll get there without a doubt. So shameless plug, make sure that you guys follow me, Jason Ray 1. Any news, notes, OU sports related, softball, football, basketball, baseball, whatever it is, OU related, we'll be on top of it and talking about that, retweeting and liking and all the things. So make sure you follow me. Also, make sure that you guys tune in Mark Rogers and Jason Watkins every 11:30 a.m. On Wednesday. I know they had to move it to Monday this past week. A lot of good stuff for those two. And then I know Mark was at Big Ten Media Days this week. So a lot of good content from him. So, but make sure you join him at 11:30 a.m. every Wednesday morning, and then they will talk through everything OU related as well. And like I said, we try to keep this a little bit different in terms of your coverage, and talk through things like that. And in the world of sports, there's always, when you go from a Wednesday to a Friday, there's different things to talk about. But particularly as we went from Monday to Friday this week, there's a lot of different things to talk about. So let's go ahead and get started. And kind of the first area where we've been talking a lot on, guys, is kind of everything on the recruiting side. So I know there's been a decent amount of doom and gloom, I think, in terms of some recruiting news. But I'm here to kind of tell you guys that I don't think there's a ton of doom out there. There's just there's some different things that are going on with some of these kids and things like that. So I think the first guy to talk about is Williams Nwaneri. He has announced his commitment date is going to be on August 7th, so coming up pretty soon here in about a week and a half. So I think there's been some rumors with Oklahoma having party at the Palace this weekend that with Nwaneri not there and potentially visiting Missouri, that there's some bad news on the horizon, and I don't really know that that's necessarily the case right now. Still think Oklahoma leads for him. Would be obviously still a huge big time commitment for Oklahoma to get there. I think there's some things that Missouri is offering him in terms of NIL packages, a bag, so to speak. That's going to be it's going to be really hard for him to say no to. But the one thing that you have to remember on this recruitment is, number one, that OU is very, very competitive from an NIL perspective. So whatever Missouri's offering, even if it is a little bit better than what Oklahoma's offering, there's a lot of intangibles that lead Oklahoma, that cause Oklahoma to be in a better position for Nwaneri than maybe what Missouri is, right? Oklahoma's got the history. Oklahoma's got, even though the 6-7 last season, there's a better trajectory for Oklahoma football, right, than there is Missouri. Missouri's 0 Heisman Trophy winners, 0 national championships. So I think what Oklahoma has, and then the relationship with that Bates and Venables have with Nwaneri, and some of the things that Oklahoma is doing from a soul mission perspective is very enticing for Nwaneri. Sorry, it's hard for me to say that word. But I think Missouri's in the conversation, but I still think Oklahoma leads, and I think even some of the guys on the Missouri side that would probably say the same thing. So it'll be very interesting as that continues to kind of roll out here over the next week and a half. I think even though whoever gets this commitment, it's someone that's going to have to continuously to recruit him throughout the fall as you get into signing day. So that one's, like I said, that one's coming up on August 7th, and then you have a few. And I'm sorry, I kind of overstepped here. I forgot about Michael Patterson McDonald, who will announce his commitment on July 31st. Still think that is very, very highly Oklahoma at this point. Would be surprised if that goes elsewhere. And so so as I mentioned, there's a group of commitments that's going to happen, August 25th, 26th time frame. So you've got Caden Durham, the running back. That has been between Oklahoma and LSU over the last few, I think there's a few weeks, few months, whatever you want to put it. I think there's been some gaining momentum that LSU is in a good spot for Caden Durham. I think this one is very, very close right now. I don't know that I could say one way or the other who leads. I mean, I think Oklahoma at one point was in a very, very good spot. I think there's some track and field influence there between Oklahoma and LSU to see who ends up getting him. The one thing that I'll say is some of these kids seem to be very, very close in terms of the time frame in which they're making these commitments. So if I had to flip a coin here, and I think Oklahoma still has a slight lead for Caden. I think the track and field and the whole aspect of some of the guys that he's close with, that I feel good about Oklahoma's chances on. But that gap has certainly narrowed, a little bit, so to speak. And then you got David Stone again. That's on August 26th. He's probably the IMG actually plays on ESPN2 the opening weekend, in that kind of high school ESPN showcase that he will make his commitment on that date. Still, I think he's a kid that loves the process, so I think he trolls some people from time to time. So I think, and I think there's a lot of concerns with him talking about Alabama on Twitter, and then some other things like that. But I think Oklahoma still remains in a really good spot for David Stone. would be a little bit surprised if he went elsewhere. Then you look at Dominic McKinley, another guy that Oklahoma's in on. Again, another guy that has been, over the course, a heavy, not necessarily a lean, but just a heavy thought that getting a kid out of Baton Rouge, out of LSU's backyard was going to be tough. But I think Oklahoma's in a very, very good spot there. And then Nigel Smith is another guy. He's not going to actually make his commitment until September 8th, but he's another guy that Oklahoma's really, really in on. Now, I say this. It would be very unlikely that Oklahoma is going to get all four. I mean, all four of those are four of those are high 4-star, 5-star kids. So conventional wisdom says that you're probably not going to get all four of those, but I think when you look at that, if Oklahoma gets 3 of the 4, it's an outstanding defensive class. And if they get 2 of the 4 that I'd mentioned, it's still a really, really good class. Now, what Oklahoma can't do is, something happened, they end up getting, shut out, or maybe 1 of the 4 of those. I think if they can get at least 2 or 3, I think they'll be in a really good spot. Still believe Nwaneri and David Stone are the 2 most likely, with Nigel Smith and Dominic McKinley just a little bit below that. Just talking about some other kids that Oklahoma's been in on or had links to. Terry Bussey, the 5-star athlete out of there in Texas. I think he's probably very much leaning and probably going to pledge his commitment to Texas A&M. Texas A&M has been very, very good in that they do a good job in those skill position guys in terms of what their NIL and packages are for him. So he's a guy that, like I said, I think will end up being an Aggie. Grant Bricks, offensive lineman, really, really big time kid. I think the one thing that you have to, when you look at that, the longer that one goes, the more it favors Oklahoma. I don't believe he has a commitment date scheduled. Again, Oklahoma, Nebraska, Kansas State, much different. I would say there's much different pitches from each school, right? I think a lot of Oklahoma. A lot of Oklahoma ties for him specifically is related to the weight room and what Schmitty's able to do. Has a girlfriend at K-State, so that's not ideal, if you're a Sooner. And so, it'll be interesting to see how that plays out and, where he ends up going. I'll just mention this briefly. Bennett Warren had released his commitment date, and his final 5 looks very much like Michigan's going to get his pledge. I mean, at this point, Danny Okoye, he's going to be a guy that's probably not going to commit until later in the fall. I believe from everything I've heard that he is going to be at the party at the Palace this weekend. Anyway, that's a really good thing. I think Oklahoma's really working on him hard. Big time local homeschool kid from Tulsa, Noah. That I think if Oklahoma plays the way that I think a lot of us think that they'll play this year, in a really good position. Braden Platt, 4-star linebacker. I think. There was some time where it looked like Oklahoma was in a good spot for him. Legacy kid. I think Oregon's probably where he's going to land. At least that's what it looks like at this point. There were some thoughts if Oklahoma could get him getting on campus here for the party at the Palace, and at one point he looked like he was going to. Might have been a little bit of a negotiation for Oregon to up the bag a little bit on their side, but we'll see how that goes. Eddie Pierre-Louis, 4-star offensive lineman. I think Oklahoma's in a good spot for him. That was really, at one point, I think that was an Oklahoma and UCF battle. I think you have to like Oklahoma's trending a little bit in a better position for him. For him right now. And then there's some other kids that you want to look at. Michael Boganowski, linebacker, he's on campus for party at the Palace as well. Eli Bowen, another kid. I think you really like where he's at for Oklahoma. Obviously, with Peyton being here, I think that certainly helps. Devon Jordan, 3-star kid locally here out of Tulsa Union. I think Oklahoma's in a good spot there. And then it's on our list here, but Eugene Brooks is another guy that just pledged his commitment to Oklahoma just this week. Big time kid, 3-star kid. When you look at 247, 4-star in other places, I think he'll be a composite 4-star by the time it's all said and done. So Oklahoma's got up to the number 15th rated class on 247 at this point. So continue to look and see that go well. I think the other thing to mention here, and I won't go into depth about this, but Oklahoma's done a really good job on some of these 25 kids. Got a couple of commitments earlier, one from a 4-star wide receiver. So I think things are trending a little bit in a better position in terms of early commitments for 2025 as opposed to what they've had for 2024. Again, I don't think the one thing to keep in mind is between now and the dead period for Nwaneri, because I think that's the one that's most near and dear to all of our hearts. If he goes to Missouri, I think maybe in terms of he gets a visit before the dead period, I think there's maybe at that point there might be a little bit of cause for concern. If he moves his recruitment date, commitment date back a little bit, maybe there's a little bit of cause for concern there. But other than that, I feel good about where he's at and the relationship with Oklahoma there as well. So we'll get to some of your comments and questions if there are any here. Happy Friday to everybody. Yes, thanks, Danny. Thanks for the happy birthday wishes, guys. Hank is still hoping that the power line photo gets filled in. Yeah, I think it will. And I think you're right, Hank. I know Tatum's working on Bussy as well. Don't know if it'll be enough, but I think he likes Oklahoma a lot, but not sure if there's enough to get him away from A&M at this point. Question here: chances Dylan Gabriel is asked to be more of a game manager this year behind the running game and defense. We'll come back to that question when we get there. We'll get there very quickly, and we'll talk through some of those items as well as we look at the offensive side of the ball in our preview. So if you guys have any other questions on the recruiting side of things, feel free to ask questions or make comments and things like that. But we'll continue to see this go in a positive direction here. I hope here at for the August timeframe, and as I mentioned, MPM will be committing on July 31st, and still continue to believe that's going to be in a good spot for Oklahoma, I think at this point. So the next thing I kind of wanted to get to is really some of the breaking news that happened yesterday and the day before, a little bit leaked, but it was completely confirmed yesterday that Colorado, after I believe either 12 or 13 years in the Pac-12, has moved or will be moving over to the Big 12 in 2024. So there's just so many interesting storylines around this, and I think the Pac-12 is in a dangerous position at this point. They still have yet to announce or sign one of the two, maybe both, a media rights deal, and I think a lot of the schools are feeling a little bit nervous because of that, right? Colorado's not the biggest brand in the world, but they've got a really, really big time market in Denver, Colorado, that is very advantageous for the Big 12. And new Big 12 Commissioner Brent Yormark has talked about his desire to have teams within all 4 time zones. And so I think as you see that and you look at that and look at the direction that's going, what's next for the Big 12, what's next for the Pac-12, right? Because you've already lost when you look at a time zone, and Colorado's not the like I said, they've went through parts of their history where they've been really good, a really good program, and then there are parts of their history where they've just been okay. Now I think it remains to be seen what Dion's going to be able to do with that program. I don't know. I don't think he's going to be able to turn that around overnight. But it was a 1-11 squad last year. But we'll see how that goes this year. But then you've just got iconic brands like USC and UCLA going into the Big Ten. And so when you look at the combination of those three things, the Pac-12, ironically, is in a position very familiar to Big 12 fans and us through the last couple of years of now what do they do? So you've got the Big 12 in a position of aggression in terms of what they've been able to do. Certainly post Oklahoma and Texas moving to the SEC, bringing in who they brought in for this year and beyond with UCF, BYU, Houston, and Cincinnati, and now you add Colorado. I think from everything I'm hearing, there's going to be another one. They're going to add one more for that 2024 season to get back to where they're at this year for 14 teams. They're not going to stay at 13. So who's that next team? Now every time there's conference realignment, you have everyone coming out of the woodwork, talking about they're hearing this team's talking to this conference and this team's talking to this conference. So I think there's a few names that I've heard particularly that could fall fairly quickly. Arizona is the team that I've heard that to watch out for that could drop fairly quickly. I've seen a couple of things where Washington and Oregon are talking to the Big 12 as well. I think if you're Brent Yormark and then you're the Big 12, I think initially your thought is go get Oregon. Oregon is a big time power in terms of a name that really just opens some eyeballs in terms of what that looks like, right? So I think Oregon's a team or a school that will be interesting, but everything that I've heard that Arizona could be the next one. So I think they get one. I think they're going to stay even in an even number. So whether they get one or whether they're able to potentially get three before that 2024 season will be interesting to see. You've seen that. You've seen Florida State has come out, and there's some reports that Florida State has expressed interest in dropping out of the ACC and potentially looking elsewhere. Obviously there's going to be a lot of bidders for Florida State. I mean, I think when you look at them, the SEC or the Big Ten, but probably more the SEC looks like a big time landing spot for them. So it's just going to be incredibly intriguing just to see where some of these chips fall as we move forward with with really what realignment looks like. I think right now you have to believe that the Pac-12 is really in a position where they have to act quickly, or there's going to be some teams that have a little bit of a kind of a cold feet type of situation in terms of kind of entering into a long-term agreement, long-term relationship, so to speak, with the Pac-12, knowing that you've lost two of your biggest brands in UCLA and USC for one, and then you've got another I don't mean this as disrespect, but rat jumping the ship, right? So I think it'll be so interesting, and so I think it doesn't look good. I mean, at this point, if you're a Pac-12 fan, but we'll see how that continues to go through. I think we'll see. Honestly, I feel like we'll see some news before the season starts around another potential addition to the Big 12, whether that be Oregon, whether that be Washington, whether that be Arizona or wherever. I think it will be interesting. But I think the thing to think of it, I think a couple of years ago, we were, when we were on here talking about Oklahoma and Texas moving to the SEC, you kind of felt like the Big 12 was pending implosion, to take a word from Hank here in terms of what that looks like. And they were able to really rally the troops and be a conference that's not certainly dormant from that perspective. So we'll see how that continues to go, but very interesting. Keep an eye on that as things progress with that. We'll be sure to talk through that as we go through, without a doubt. So let's get to a little bit of the fall camp news and things like that in terms of, things that are going on. I think as you look into, and I'll just kind of go to this question here. I've heard a couple of names. Offense, I think Gavin Freeman is a guy from a skill position perspective that Venables is talked up a lot on the offensive side of the ball. I think you look at Danny Stutzman as a guy on the defense. Lewis Carter, a young kid. I think he's going to be a kid that's going to be, may end up being a little bit too difficult to keep off the field. Just kind of from his weight room prowess, if he's able to, kind of learn the position, understanding that the linebacker position is one of the toughest in Brent Venables' defense to learn and to be good at the level that he demands and expects it to be good at. So those are just a couple of names. We'll get some. I'm sure as that media availability happens on Tuesday of next week. But those are just a couple of that I've heard over the summer that have shown some flashes. Jaden Gibson is another guy, on the offensive side of the ball as well. So let's go with kind of my prediction on the depth chart. We can start with the easiest one first, and then kind of work our way. So when you look at the quarterback position, obviously this is Dylan Gabriel's team. I think it's interesting to see the commentary that Jeff Lebby had a couple of days ago in his coach's luncheon, when he really talked about how impressed he was with what Jackson Arnold has been able to do, and really kind of sung his praises just in terms of, they've been pleasantly surprised, and to say that they are pleasantly surprised with a kid like him that was a 5-star kid, one of the best quarterbacks in the country in the high school ranks, very highly recruited, very highly discussed, and for someone to be a little bit, I don't know if they ahead of schedule, but really impressive, I think shows dividends. And so he is, I would say it right now, he's your clear backup. I think your only competition, so to speak, right now is probably between your QB3, whether that's General Booty or Davis Bevel. I think a lot of Oklahoma fans have some of the bad taste in our mouth from the what he did or what he was unable to do against Texas last year in his only start, and really was just did not look good, not serviceable, even from a backup perspective. So I think it'll be interesting to see what that looks like with him, right? But I think there was a question, and I'll go back to it, related to Dylan Gabriel asked to be more of a game manager. I don't think so. I mean, I don't think that he's going to be sort of a game manager, because I don't think he has, may not necessarily have the level of talent like as an Alabama or Georgia around him at this point, to just manage the game. He's going to have to make plays. And I think he will. I think that there's a couple of things, and he knows these things. He was one of the worst quarterbacks in the Big 12 in terms of third down. So he's got to be better on third down. He's got to be better at the middle of the field. He's got to be better at late in the games, not missing wide open throws, not locking in the receivers and things like that. And, you have to a certain degree, you have to sort of expect that being his first year in P5 competition, right? With UCF Group of 5, he had a couple of games, certainly against P5 competition, but he didn't have that consistently. So, I'm hopeful that you see a little bit of a difference with him here in 2023 related to that and related to his ability to produce on the field. And I think the one thing that Oklahoma fans really just need to understand and get it in your, just to be clear with, is don't compare him with Kyler Murray. Don't compare him with Baker Mayfield. Don't even compare him with Jalen Hurts. He's not that level of a quarterback, but I think he can do the things that need to be done. He just needs support from the offensive line, from the running game, and things like that. So to answer it, long story short, I don't think he's going to be just a game manager, but I do think they're going to do some things around him to give him the opportunity to be a little bit more successful at times than he was last year. Just remember, guys, this was a 6-7 team a year ago, but they were in so many close games that they really just didn't make plays down the stretch. Really, just inopportune mistakes at the wrong time. And so, you clean those things up a little bit. And this team last year, was, 10, 14 points away from being an 8-4, 9-3 team. So you if you're able to put all those together, you think with the second year in the system, both on the offense and defensive side, you've got kids that are a little bit more accustomed to the more rigorous strength and conditioning program, which so the talent and the familiarity factor, along with making some of those adjustments that allow you to make to be better in crunch time situations, will be very interesting. Jimmy, thanks for the comment here, or question, I'm sorry. How much playing time does Jackson Arnold get? So I think, there's a couple of schools of thought here, right? It's going to be interesting to see if there's some packages from time to time, where Jackson Arnold is part of that offense, right? I think at a minimum, Jimmy, he's going to get his 4 games in just to get a taste of what that looks like. So I think you have to hope and you have to think that early on in the season, Arkansas State, Tulsa, probably not SMU, but a couple of those games, Arkansas State and Tulsa, that give him the opportunity to see what he can do on the field in a big time atmosphere, right? Big time atmosphere, against not just against an FCS team, a couple of maybe lower tier, but certainly FBS teams as well. So I think that'll be, if he gets more than 4 games, I think there's one of 2 situations that have occurred. Number one, either you've got an injury from Dillon Gabriel and he's kind of forced into play, or 2, Dillon Gabriel is just not performing at the level that he needs to, and which means Oklahoma's probably not having a strong early, middle, in at whatever point this is a season where he's really just required to get in. Now, there could be the situation in the latter half of the season that maybe he's just too good to keep off the field. I just think with everything that DG brings to the table that he has, I don't think you're in that situation. Just keep in mind, this is not the same situation as Spencer Rattler and Caleb Williams. Spencer Rattler was having a very average, mediocre early season, and the things around him, just in terms of not being more of a partier and not really putting as much as he needs to be putting into it. And so that's where the student section got there. So DG's putting as much into it as possible. 25 touchdowns, 6 interceptions a year ago. Still, the stats are really good. Maybe not Baker, not Kyler good, not even as good as they've been in the past, but he is serviceable and good enough to get this team to 10-11 wins, I think. Hank, thanks for that. DG can be a game changer if he's having to play a safe physical. If he's not having to play a safe physical. So I think you're spot on. That was one of the things, Hank, that I was going to mention in terms of DG for this year. I think you're going to see a little bit more giving him and more of an opportunity to run. I think they did that a little bit earlier on in the year after he got, obviously after he got the concussion against TCU, and Oklahoma saw what they had behind him last year. I think they were a little bit less than thrilled to see him run, just because of what could possibly happen. From a backup perspective, I think that there's much more. I think confidence about in the backup situation, and then you've got you even have to assume that you've got improvement from Davis Bevel as well. In that QB3 situation as well. Absolutely agree, Hank. Yeah, get him some snaps in garbage time, Dominique. I agree with you. Yeah, absolutely. That's another opportunity just to get him some snaps there. So, so now let's go to the offensive line. So, when you look at this moving over from 2022 to 23, a couple of big time losses. You've got Wanye Morris, who was one of the tackles that left, and you've got some holes there. I think so. There's a couple of. And ironically, I think the tackles are probably more solidified than others. So I think you're going to see Tyler Guyton at one of the tackle positions. Actually did a pretty solid job. Went back and forth a little bit in the bowl game, but played against one of the best defensive ends in the country, against Florida State. But then I think you've got the Stanford transfer Walter Rouse that will take the other tackle position to start the season. Don't be surprised to see Jacob Sexton when he gets ready, when he gets healthy, possibly to challenge Walter Rouse for that tackle spot. But I think those two are your bookends, right, so to speak, in terms of what the of what that looks like for game one against Arkansas State, in my mind. So you've got those two, and then you go kind of from the outside in. When you look at the guards, I think the guards are going to be a little bit more of a interesting competition. I think between those two, you've got a couple of transfers coming in, and Caleb Schaefer, and obviously McCade Mattower from last year. That's also in there. Then you got Troy Everett. So I think, there was some school of thought, and there was some even hope at some point that you might see potentially Andrew Rame move over to the guard spot. But I think all signs are pointing to him still kind of being that in that center position. So I think he is a guy that at this point I would probably pencil in as your starter at center, and then you've got some competition, I would say, at the guard position. I think Troy Everett probably can play that center position if Oklahoma looks and maybe Rame's better suited for a guard. I think the thing that's been the case with Rame is his strength and his ability to to play with leverage, his ability to just not get pushed around in that area. So I think he's a guy that will probably be there. But as I mentioned, you've got Caleb Schaefer, you've got Savion Byrd, you've got Josh Bates, you've got Caden Green, McCade Mattower. I think if I had to make the decision right now, I think I've got Savion Byrd at one of your guard positions, and probably Troy Everett at one of the other. Troy Everett or Caleb Schaefer. You could kind of go either way, really kind of depending on what Bedenbaugh chooses to do from that center and guard spot, right? So that's who I would go with right now. But there's going to be a lot of healthy competition, as far as that goes as well. A little bit of a to use Hank's word, a little bit of a traffic jam inside, but I think a lot of good, healthy competition. Then you've got some guys, from an Aaron Park's perspective, that could is Caden Green good enough to, take some reps as a true freshman, knowing that he was in here in the spring. So that remains to be seen. But we'll continue to see how that goes. Jimmy has a question. Everything I've heard, is in good shape and he's ready to go. He's all clear. Everything's good. Of course, obviously that could change once he gets into everything and starts going and everything that like that. But I do think that he is in a good spot. So now you start moving into a little bit more of the skill position players. We'll start with the running backs and then talk about wide receivers and tight ends. So I think when you look at the running backs, guys, I think the running backs is one of the areas that probably the strength, at least from a depth perspective, on this team, right? So I think there was a question earlier about does Oklahoma rely on the run game? I think they'll rely on the run game maybe a little bit more than they did last year, to a certain degree. I think they have the ability to, right? So I think when you look at Javonte Barnes and Gavin Sawchuk, that's your 1A, 1B. Parker said this before. I've said this a couple of times. I think this is the best combination of running backs that Oklahoma has had at one time, probably since Samaje Perine and Joe Mixon at the same time. So, it's I would probably I maybe would lean from a depth chart perspective at Javonte Barnes first and Gavin Sawchuk next, but I think they're probably going to get pretty close to equal amount of carries, and so. You like those. Marcus Major is another guy. If he can stay healthy, I think he's good enough to get some looks, have an opportunity to be a big time contributor. Maybe a little bit more of a third and short goal line back. I think Caleb Hicks showed a lot of good promise early on in spring. Really did a good job. Was one of the standouts of spring overall. So I think he has an opportunity to maybe see the field. And then you've got Tawi Walker and Dalen Smothers that have an opportunity there to provide some depth. So I think you've got a lot more competitive depth with those six, that I've mentioned. But you have to really would not be, if things go well, offensive line produces well, you play well overall as a team. I think this has an opportunity to be a group between when you look at Javonte Barnes and when you look at Gavin Sawchuk, a couple of guys that could approach 2,000 yards together. But we'll see how that goes, and if there's some competitive depth there, that you get some additional playing time from some of those other kids. I think Marcus Major is a kid that you root for. He's just struggled with so many injuries as he's been in Oklahoma, and really hasn't had the opportunity to completely show what he can do. But when he's healthy, he's really good. So absolutely think that will be possible for him. And exactly what you mentioned here, potentially could be possible for four guys to go 500. I would almost lean towards three guys getting 750 yards potentially, if he could stay, if Marcus Major could stay healthy. But that's a good thought, Hank, without a doubt. So now let's go to the tight ends and the wide receivers as well. So tight end, it starts and it not necessarily ends, but the tight end spot is an area where there's the probably the least amount of depth on the offensive side of the ball, where you got Austin Stogner on the you got Austin Stogner at the tight end, who's going to get a majority. And everything I've heard, looks bigger, looks stronger, looks faster than he was a couple years ago at Oklahoma. So I think you'll see some good things out of him. He's going to be the primary tight end there. Now you've got a host of probably three guys that will be vying for depth playing time. Blake Smith, the transfer from Texas A&M. You've got Jason Llewellyn and Caden Helms. So I think traditionally Jason Llewellyn has probably been more of, what you would think of as more of a blocking tight end, as opposed to a receiving tight end. And Caden Helms is more in the mold of a receiving tight end versus a blocking tight end. So it'll be interesting to see what their progression is from last year to this year. But it's an area that I think can potentially be better than it was a year ago, but there's got some good things that really need to happen with him. And then, kind of finally we go to the wide receiver spot. And I think for me, this is, I think I'd said this earlier in my tweet, that when you look at a few storylines, I think how good this offense can be is very dependent on wide receivers that can potentially step up. Now, I've got listed here, I have listed here about 10 guys that are going to be in the mix and given an opportunity, to compete at a high level and to play well. So, when you think about Jalil Farouk, I think he's a guy that obviously is absolutely going to be a starter. Without a doubt, Oklahoma needs him to be the guy to be that number one guy, to be a borderline 1,000-yard receiver, or even more, for this team to be successful. You've got some really, really solid, and you like what you got, possession receivers from a Gavin Freeman perspective. As I mentioned before, he had caught a long touchdown pass from Jackson Arnold in the spring game. Venables has talked about him as one of the most impressive players on the team, particularly of the receiving core, kind of throughout the spring, summer time frame. So he's a guy, I think, when you got, and then obviously you got Drake Stoops. So those two guys are, Gavin Freeman's a little bit different in terms of he has the ability to take the top off a little bit. Drake is a little bit more of a possession guy, but I think both of those guys are going to play a pivotal role and a big role, within this offense. So you've got those guys that you feel pretty familiar with, but not sure how they're going to be able to sort of be that. If can Gavin Freeman be that deep threat, or is he more in the kind of the possession receiver mold? And then you have some other guys that are more of those deep threat guys. When you look at it, Andrell Anthony, when you look at a LV Bunkley Shelton, when you look at a Brennan Thompson, Jaquaze Petaway, those guys are, you've got to have one or two of those guys to really fulfill that role. I've heard great things about Petaway in the summer. You've got some other guys that Andrell Anthony that was, with limited success at Michigan, and you just need one of those guys to step up. A couple of them, and then you've got some freshmen last year that that really wasn't able to make as big of an impact as you thought they might be. So I think between Jaden Gibson and Nick Anderson, one of those two has to really be a factor in terms of being a big time receiver for Oklahoma and making that next step. You like the body and the build and what he brings to you, Jaden Gibson, maybe from a red zone perspective. But Nick Anderson's anything like Rodney Anderson. I think Oklahoma's going to have a great one. So just remains to be seen how quickly he's going to be able to be there and to do that for Oklahoma. I think you've got a couple of you've got one guy that, I expected some really good things from J.J. Hester coming in from Missouri, really never materialized. And then DJ Graham. DJ Graham's another guy that, has off the charts athleticism, has, big time catch radius, as we've seen on the defensive side of the ball. How quickly can he learn the nuances of being a wide receiver? So that will continue to be my biggest kind of question mark. Maybe not even question mark. I won't say question mark, but area of focus and attention is how are the wide receivers progressing in camp. And so, and then, the tight end depth is there as well. But, you can go in every position, I think, and talk about some question marks and areas. But I think overall, just how do those wide receivers come together, and how does that tight end depth show itself for Oklahoma? And then, like I said, next week we'll get into the defensive side of the ball. Got a question right here. been hearing really good things about Kanik. He's gonna be a major contributor to this team. I would say right now, we'll get into that a little bit more as I mentioned next week, but probably a starter on this team for next year. Right now, kind of battling with Kobe McKenzie for that other linebacker spot. So, as we always do, we'll end with a little bit of a softball discussion. There's not a whole lot to discuss right now. Oklahoma's still waiting. I think the Kelly Maxwell sweepstakes is still ongoing. I would expect her to make some sort of a decision this next week in terms of where she's going. I think Oklahoma's part of the discussion. It's really I would say right now for Oklahoma, it's really a nice to have versus a necessity based on where Oklahoma's at from a pitching staff perspective. There's obviously everybody's focused on football here in the fall, but there's a lot of, kind of that fall battle series that Oklahoma had last year will be really interesting to watch this year, particularly some of the younger kids for Oklahoma. Taryn Kern was someone that was linked to Oklahoma at one point. Now she is going to Stanford. So I think you've got a couple of freshmen that will have an opportunity to vie for some playing time early on in this season. When you look at Ella Parker, she's a freshman coming in. I think she's a young lady that's going to have every opportunity to have a big role on this team. I think her and Cassidy Pickering are the two that I would say that are the most, probably ready. And so, but there'll be a lot of competition related to that shortstop position, who grabs that position. So that's a lot of things to kind of keep in mind. And I think by the time we get on here next week, we'll be able to talk a little bit more about who potentially that might be in terms of if Oklahoma has added another person to the depth, or if they're where they're at. So, like I said, make sure you guys follow me on Twitter. My Twitter handle is JasonRay1. Is it Twitter or X? I don't know what you call it now. Anyways, I'm just going to start calling it Twitter until it's universally known as X. So make sure you follow me at JasonRay1. And as I mentioned, make sure you every Wednesday follow Mark and Jason on here, 11:30 a.m. Central. Just like me, sometimes they'll tend to need to move things around from time to time. And then next week we will talk. Hopefully, have a little bit more recruiting news. We'll have what I would assume is one commitment to talk about with MPM, and then we will we'll be closer to a Nwaneri decision date as well, and then maybe some more tidbits on how fall camp is going, and then we'll talk about from a defensive perspective. I'll give you my my depth chart as we get there. So thanks everybody for joining. Make sure you hit that like button, hit the subscribe to our channel here, hit that notification bell. If there's any topics that you guys are interested in learning about, knowing about, talking about, anything like that, we'll kind of get that started, and then we will we'll get going with that. We're here. We're almost here. The long anticipated wait from really the end of the season, but from the spring game to fall camp, we're finally here in just a few short days. So make sure you guys tell a friend about this, and we will make sure that we continue to go every Friday. As we get closer, it'll be, as I mentioned, it'll be more of a pregame show that will preview some stuff, maybe even talk about some high school games and stuff like that. And then certainly we will get cranked up with our pregame and postgame show as the season gets started in about a month, a little bit more than a month. Like I think it'll be a month from Saturday. Will be game one. So getting very close. So I hope everyone stay cool. Try to stay away from the heat, especially if you're around here, Oklahoma, Texas area. It is insanely hot. So do everything you can to stay safe, stay healthy. Have a great weekend. Boomer Sooner, and God bless.